poor girl hugs the wrong man. He was a millionaire and he falls madly in love with her. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The city bustled with noise, honking cars, rushing footsteps, and voices blending together. Emily weaved through the masses, her heart pounding in her chest. She was late, again. Her part-time job barely paid enough to cover rent, and her manager was running out of patience. Clutching her worn-out bag, she scanned the street, searching desperately for her friend, Mia, who had promised to meet her with a much-needed loan. At that very moment, Alexander Carter stepped out of a high-end cafe, adjusting the cuff of his expensive suit. A self-made millionaire, he was used to people treating him with caution or admiration, but never warmth. His life was structured, predictable, and devoid of real emotion. Lost in thought, he barely noticed the crowd moving around him. And then it happened. Out of nowhere, a pair of arms wrapped around him in a tight, unexpected hug. His entire body stiffened. His first instinct was to pull away, but something about the embrace froze him in place. It was warm, genuine, real. Emily, realizing her mistake, gasped and stumbled back, her face turning red with embarrassment. "Oh my God! I'm so sorry. I thought you were," she stammered, covering her mouth in shock. Alexander stared at her, speechless. For the first time in years, someone had touched him without expectation, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. Emily's face burned with embarrassment, her hands flying to her mouth as she took a step back. I'm so sorry. I thought you were someone else," she stammered, her voice shaky. Alexander didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen, staring at her with an unreadable expression. He was a man used to control, to calculated decisions, yet in this moment he felt completely unprepared. For years, his life had been filled with cold business deals, fake smiles, and distant handshakes. But this was real. The warmth of that accidental embrace still lingered on his skin, a strange and unfamiliar sensation stirring inside him. Emily, too mortified to stick around, took a step back, then turned and bolted into the crowd. Her heart pounded in her ears as she wove through the busy sidewalk, silently cursing herself for the mistake. Alexander watched her disappear, something inside him telling him he should stop her, ask her name, say something. But he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, completely thrown off balance by a moment so small, yet so strangely significant. As he finally exhaled, he realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. And now he couldn't stop wondering, who was she? Alexander sat in his luxurious corner office, staring blankly at the skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city moved below him, a world of endless transactions, meetings, and deals. Yet none of it held his attention. His mind kept replaying the moment. The hug, the warmth, the feeling of something real. Why did it shake him so much? It was just a mistake, a brief accident. And yet, it had cracked something deep inside him. A wall he hadn't even realized he'd built. Frustrated, he leaned forward and tapped his fingers on the desk. Who was she? He had access to unlimited resources, connections, and the best private investigators money could buy. Finding one woman in the city shouldn't be difficult. He pulled up security footage from the cafe's exterior cameras. There, her face, blurry but unmistakable. A few calls later, he had her name, Emily Parker. And with her name came her story. A struggling young woman working multiple jobs just to survive. A sole guardian to her little sister, barely making ends meet. Alexander sat back, staring at the screen, intrigued in a way he couldn't explain. This girl, this ordinary, struggling girl, had shaken his entire world with a single hug. And for reasons he didn't yet understand, he needed to see her again. The small cafe smelled of fresh coffee and warm pastries, a stark contrast to the cold, towering glass offices Alexander was used to. He adjusted his cuff, his sharp suit out of place among the casual diners and weary-eyed staff rushing from table to table. And then he saw her, Emily. She wore a faded apron, her hair loosely tied back, exhaustion evident in her eyes as she carried a tray to a nearby table. But despite the weariness, there was something about her. Something real, something unpolished, something untouched by wealth and status. When she turned and spotted him, her steps faltered, eyes widening in shock. Why was he here? She quickly composed herself, swallowing her surprise as she approached his table. "Good evening, sir. What can I get you?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Alexander smirked slightly. So, she was going to pretend not to recognize him. Interesting. "Just a coffee," he said casually, watching her. Emily nodded, scribbling the order down even though it was unnecessary. She turned to leave, but before she could, his deep voice stopped her. "You ran off before I could say thank you." She froze. Slowly, she turned back, her wary eyes meeting his. "For what?" she asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "For something I haven't felt in a long time," Alexander said simply. For the first time, Emily really looked at him. Not as a billionaire, but as a man searching for something even money couldn't buy. And so, she sat down, and for the first time, they talked. Not as strangers, but as two people whose lives had unexpectedly intertwined. Emily stirred the coffee in front of her, avoiding Alexander's gaze. She still couldn't believe he was here, sitting in this tiny cafe, in a suit that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. "So," she said cautiously, "you tracked me down just to thank me?" Alexander leaned forward slightly, his piercing eyes studying her. "Partially." He hesitated for a moment before saying, "I want to offer you a job." Emily blinked. "A job?" He nodded. "At my company. A stable position. Good pay. A future." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Look, I appreciate it, but I'm not a charity case." Alexander's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not giving you charity, Emily. I'm giving you a chance." She glanced down at her worn-out apron, at the barely noticeable stains from years of overuse. A chance. A real job. A way out of this endless cycle of struggling just to survive. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "Why me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Alexander said simply. "I know you work hard. I know you're supporting your little sister on your own. And I know you deserve better." Emily clenched her jaw, her heart pounding. This was insane. Too good to be true. And yet, what other option did she have? She exhaled slowly. "All right, I'll do it. But I earn my way. No special treatment." A small smile tugged at Alexander's lips. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Emily adjusted the stack of reports on her desk, her fingers brushing against the keyboard as she double-checked the numbers. It had been weeks since she started working at Carter Enterprises, and despite her initial doubts, she had proven herself. Alexander watched from his office, arms crossed, as Emily confidently presented her ideas in a meeting. She wasn't intimidated by the corporate world, nor by him. If anything, she challenged him in ways no one else dared. "You need to stop overcomplicating things," she had told him once, crossing her arms. No one had ever spoken to him like that, and strangely he liked it. Somewhere between the stolen glances, the teasing remarks, and the late nights spent working side by side, admiration had turned into something deeper. One evening, after hours, they found themselves alone in the office. Emily leaned back in her chair, stretching. "I swear, if I see one more spreadsheet, I might pass out." Alexander smirked, setting down his pen. Wouldn't be the first time someone fell asleep on the job. Emily laughed, a sound that had become his favorite over the weeks. The moment lingered. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. His eyes flickered to hers, searching, questioning. That night, as he watched her leave, he finally admitted it to himself. He was falling for her. And there was no turning back. The headlines hit like a storm. Billionaire Alexander Carter romantically linked to former waitress, gold digger, or true love? Paparazzi swarmed outside the office, cameras flashing. Microphones shoved in Emily's face whenever she stepped outside. Online, ruthless comments painted her as an opportunist, a woman who had strategically placed herself into Alexander's life. Inside the cold walls of high society, whispers and disapproving glances followed her everywhere. Alexander's business partners, old money acquaintances, and even his own family warned him against her. She doesn't belong in our world. She's after your money. This will ruin your reputation. Emily felt the weight of it all crushing her. She had worked so hard to prove herself, but to them, she would always just be the poor girl who got lucky. One night, she met Alexander in his office, her heart heavy. "This isn't going to work," she whispered. His expression hardened. "You don't get to decide that for me." Tears burned in her eyes. "I don't fit in your world, Alexander. No matter what I do, I'll always be the girl who doesn't belong." He stepped closer, his voice firm yet tender. "You didn't change my life because of money, Emily. You changed it because of who you are." But was love enough? Emily wasn't sure anymore. And so she walked away. Days passed, then weeks. The space between them grew unbearable. One evening, as Emily left work, she found Alexander standing outside in the rain, waiting for her. No cameras, no grand gestures, just him. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because I'm rich, not because I can give you the world, but because I don't want to live in it without you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and this time she didn't run. She stepped into his arms, holding him tightly, just like she had that very first day. That hug had never been a mistake. It was destiny. Sometimes the smallest moments can change our lives forever. What started as a simple mistake, a hug given to the wrong person, turned into something neither Emily nor Alexander could have imagined. Love isn't about wealth or status. It's about connection, understanding, and finding someone who truly sees you. Fate brought them together in the most unexpected way, proving that some mistakes are meant to happen. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let us know in the comments. Do you believe in destiny? And where are you watching from? Sparkling heart.